The Trial That Shocked America, the Caylee Anthony Story. Introduction. In the summer of 2008, a beautiful 3-year-old girl named Caylee Anthony vanished from her home in Orlando, Florida, without a trace. For 31 days, her mother, Caylee Anthony, said nothing. She didn't call the police. She didn't tell her parents. She didn't file a missing person report. She didn't express concern to a single friend. For 31 days, she went to nightclubs, spent time with her boyfriend, got a new tattoo, and lived as if nothing had happened at all. The world would eventually come to know Caylee's face from missing person posters and news broadcasts. But by the time anyone knew she was gone, it was already too late. What followed would become one of the most controversial and sensationalized trials in American history. A case that captivated millions of people across the globe, divided a nation into passionate camps of believers and doubters, and ended with a verdict so shocking that people around the world froze in disbelief. News anchors stumbled over their words. Legal experts were left speechless. The public erupted in fury. How could this happen? How could a mother accused of killing her own child walk free? How could duct tape on the skull of a 3-year-old not be enough to convict? These were the questions that everyone was asking in July of 2011, and they are questions that still haunt this case to this very day. This is the story of Caylee Anthony, the state of Florida versus Caylee Anthony, and the little girl who became the face of a national tragedy. Chapter 1: The Vanishing. Caylee Marie Anthony was born on August 9, 2005, in Wilmington, North Carolina, to Caylee Anthony and her then-boyfriend, Ryan Paisley. From the outside looking in, the Anthony family seemed like a perfectly ordinary, middle-class American family. They lived at 4937 Hope Spring Drive in Orlando, a modest beige stucco home in a quiet suburban neighborhood known as East Elm. Caylee's parents, George and Cindy Anthony, had raised their 2 children, Caylee and her older brother Lee, in that home. Now they were grandparents, and they doted on little Caylee with all the love and devotion that grandparents are known for. Caylee was described by everyone who knew her as a bright, energetic, beautiful little girl with big brown eyes, long brown hair, and a smile that could light up an entire room. She loved to dance. She loved to play dress-up. She loved being the center of attention, like any 3-year-old girl. Her grandparents adored her. She called George Papa and Cindy Mama. From the outside, she seemed like a happy, well-loved child. But appearances can be deeply deceiving. Caylee Anthony was 22 years old at the time of her daughter's disappearance. She lived with her parents and her daughter in their family home. To her family and friends, Caylee presented herself as a loving, attentive mother. But Caylee had a deeply ingrained habit of pathological lying. She had been known from her teenage years to fabricate elaborate stories, invent jobs she had never held, create imaginary friends and coworkers, and maintain those lies for years. This pattern of compulsive deception would later become central to the case against her. On June 9, 2008, Caylee Anthony was seen alive for the last time. According to Caylee's initial statements to police, she claimed she had dropped Caylee off with a babysitter named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. Caylee said this woman was a nanny she had known for years, someone she trusted completely. She told her parents that she was working a job at Universal Studios in Orlando as an event coordinator. She said she had been busy with work and her social life, but that Caylee was perfectly safe and happy with Zenaida. None of it was true. None of it. For 31 agonizing days, Cindy and George Anthony tried desperately to reach their granddaughter. They called Caylee's phone constantly. They asked to speak to Caylee. Every time they asked where Caylee was, Caylee had another excuse. Caylee was with the babysitter. Caylee was at the beach with friends. Caylee was at a birthday party. Caylee was visiting friends in another city. The excuses piled up like layers of a crumbling house of cards, each one more suspicious than the last. On July 3, 2008, Cindy Anthony's patience finally ran out. She confronted Caylee in the kitchen of their home and demanded that Caylee produce Caylee immediately. When Caylee could not and would not, Cindy picked up the phone and dialed 911. The recording of that phone call would be played countless times during the trial, and its raw emotion never failed to send chills down the spines of everyone in the courtroom. "You need to get here now," Cindy told the operator, her voice shaking with a terrifying mixture of fury and maternal terror. "My daughter just told me that she's been trying to locate her babysitter for a month. My granddaughter's been missing. My daughter's finally telling me that she hasn't seen her in a month. I think something's happened. Please come." In the background of that recording, you can hear something deeply unsettling. While Cindy screams and sobs, Caylee Anthony remains calm, collected, almost detached. Her voice is flat. She sounds more annoyed by the drama than worried about her missing child. When police arrived at the Anthony home, they found a family in complete chaos and a mother who seemed strangely disconnected from the gravity of the situation. Caylee stuck to her story firmly. Caylee was with the babysitter, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, and everything was fine. The only problem? Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez did not exist. Caylee had completely fabricated her from scratch. She had even gone so far as to invent specific details about the woman: her appearance, her personality, her apartment. Caylee claimed the babysitter lived at the Sawgrass Apartments on Conway Road in Orlando. When police investigated, they found an apartment unit that had been vacated months earlier, with no sign of anyone matching the description Caylee had provided. As it turned out, there was a real Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez living in Florida. But she had never met Caylee Anthony. She had never babysat Caylee. She had no connection to the family whatsoever. She would later file a defamation lawsuit against Caylee, though it would ultimately go nowhere. The first lie had been exposed. But there were many, many more to come. Chapter 2: The Investigation. Once law enforcement began digging into the life of Caylee Anthony, they uncovered a tangled web of lies that extended far beyond the disappearance of her daughter. It was as if Caylee had been living an entirely fictional life for years. She had told her family for 2 years that she worked at Universal Studios as an event coordinator. Every morning, she would dress in professional attire, kiss her parents and daughter goodbye, and leave the house. She would return in the evening and talk about her day at work, her coworkers, her responsibilities. In reality, she had not worked at Universal Studios since 2006. For 2 solid years, she had been maintaining a complete fabrication. Where she actually went during those daylight hours remains largely unclear even now, but witnesses placed her at shopping malls, at friends' apartments, and spending time with her boyfriend, a man named Tony Lozano. In late June of 2008, while Caylee was supposedly safe with the imaginary babysitter, Caylee Anthony made a decision that would come to define her in the eyes of the public. She went to a tattoo parlor and got a tattoo on her lower back that read Bella Vita, Italian for beautiful life. Just days after her daughter's last known sighting, Caylee was permanently marking her body with a phrase celebrating the good life. But it didn't stop there. She went to nightclubs. She was photographed laughing and dancing at a pool party. She had a friend tattoo the words, "You are my sunshine," on her wrist, a phrase she would later claim reminded her of Caylee, though she did not seem particularly moved by it at the time. She spent the night with her boyfriend. She shopped. She lived. And all the while, Caylee was nowhere to be found. Perhaps the most damning piece of physical evidence in the entire case came from a completely unexpected source: the trunk of Caylee's Pontiac Sunfire. On June 24, 2008, Caylee's car ran out of gas and was subsequently towed to an impound lot. George Anthony picked it up 12 days later on July 4. When he opened the driver's side door, he was immediately hit by an overwhelming, nauseating odor. George Anthony had worked in law enforcement for years. He knew the smell of death. He had encountered it before in his career. And he was certain that what he was smelling now was human decomposition. The smell was so powerful, so unmistakable, that George immediately contacted law enforcement. When investigators examined the car, they found a garbage bag in the trunk containing pizza, a soda can, and general household trash. But the smell could not be explained by old pizza alone. The trunk liner had a large, suspicious stain that appeared to have soaked through the carpet. Samples were carefully collected and sent to a forensic laboratory for analysis. The results that came back were devastating to Casey's defense. Forensic scientists detected the presence of chloroform in the trunk of Caylee Anthony's car, and at levels that shocked even the experts. Chloroform is a powerful chemical compound that can be used as a sedative or to render a person unconscious. In high enough concentrations, it can cause respiratory arrest and death. The levels of chloroform detected in that trunk were described by prosecution experts as being hundreds of times higher than what would be considered a normal environmental background level. But chloroform was not the only alarming finding. Forensic experts also detected chemical compounds consistent with human decomposition. A specialized forensic team collected air samples from the trunk and analyzed them for decompositional byproducts. The results were positive for compounds that are released when a human body begins to decompose. As if that were not enough, a trained cadaver dog was brought to the scene. The dog alerted on the trunk of the Pontiac Sunfire, indicating the presence of human remains. The dog also alerted on a specific area of the backyard of the Anthony home. The prosecution would build their case around this evidence. Their theory was clear and stark. Caylee Anthony was killed inside the Anthony home, or possibly in the trunk of her mother's car. Her body was then placed in the trunk, where it remained for several days, leaving behind the unmistakable chemical signature of death. Eventually, the body was removed and disposed of in the woods nearby. Chapter 3: The Discovery. For nearly 6 months, the search for Caylee Anthony gripped the nation. Her beautiful face appeared on news programs, on missing person websites, and on flyers distributed across Central Florida. Volunteers searched parks, lakes, and wooded areas. The public was outraged by the emerging details of the case: the 31 days of silence, the partying, the tattoo, the lies. Mothers across America looked at their own children and felt a chill of horror. On December 11, 2008, a meter reader named Roy Kronk was working in a wooded area less than a quarter of a mile from the Anthony family home on Hope Spring Drive. The area was densely overgrown with brush, kazoo vines, and swamp vegetation. It was the kind of place where you could walk right past something without ever seeing it. But Roy Kronk noticed something odd: a trash bag. He came back the next day and looked more closely. Inside the bag, wrapped in a children's blanket, were the skeletal remains of a very small child. The forensic examination that followed confirmed the worst fears of everyone involved. The remains were those of Caylee Marie Anthony. The little girl had been dead for months, her body left to decompose in a trash bag in the woods just minutes from her own home. The cause of death could not be determined from the skeletonized remains. The soft tissues had completely decomposed, leaving only bones. But there was one piece of evidence that would become the most powerful and haunting image of the entire case. Wrapped around the area of the skull where the mouth and nose would have been was a piece of silver-gray duct tape. It was a common household brand, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. But its position was devastating. To the prosecution, this duct tape was the murder weapon. They argued that someone had placed the tape over Caylee's mouth and nose, suffocating her to death. It was an act that required direct physical contact, direct intent, and direct force. No accident could explain it. The defense would fight back, arguing that the tape could have shifted after death. They suggested that as the body decomposed and the skull separated from the jaw, the tape could have naturally adhered to the bone. But for many observers, the image of that duct tape was impossible to ignore. Chapter 4: The Arrest and Charges. Caylee Anthony was arrested on July 16, 2008, just days after Caylee was reported missing. At first, the charges were relatively minor: child neglect and making false statements to law enforcement. But as the investigation deepened and the evidence mounted, the charges grew far more serious. On October 14, 2008, a grand jury in Orange County, Florida, indicted Caylee Anthony on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and aggravated manslaughter of a child. The state announced its intention to seek the death penalty. Caylee Anthony, a 22-year-old mother who had never been in serious trouble with the law, was now facing execution. The prosecution's theory was built on the idea of premeditation. They argued that Caylee Anthony had grown tired of being a mother. She resented the responsibility that Caylee represented. She wanted to be free to party, to pursue relationships, to live what she herself had called the beautiful life. The chloroform found in her trunk, the prosecution argued, was evidence of planning. The computer searches for how to make chloroform demonstrated premeditation. The duct tape was the instrument of death. The disposal of the body in a trash bag proved consciousness of guilt. Caylee Anthony's lead attorney was Jose Baez, a relatively unknown Florida defense lawyer who had never before handled a murder case of this magnitude. He was ambitious, aggressive, and unconventional. Over the course of the proceedings, he would assemble a formidable legal team, including Cheney Mason, a veteran Orlando defense attorney, and N. Fennell, an experienced capital defense specialist. Jose Baez's defense strategy was as controversial as it was audacious. Instead of arguing that Caylee was innocent and had nothing to do with Caylee's death, Baez put forward a story that shocked even seasoned courtroom observers. According to the defense, Caylee Marie Anthony had not been murdered at all. She had died accidentally. The theory went like this. On June 16, 2008, George and Cindy Anthony had been arguing loudly in the family home. The argument was about Caylee's lies, about the fake job, the imaginary nanny, the years of deception. In the middle of this heated confrontation, little Caylee wandered out of the back door of the house, unnoticed by anyone. The backyard had an above-ground swimming pool. The defense claimed that Caylee climbed up the pool ladder and fell into the water. By the time anyone realized what had happened, it was too late. She had drowned. But instead of calling 911, instead of getting emergency medical help, Caylee Anthony panicked. According to the defense, Caylee lived in terror of her father, George, whom she accused of having sexually abused her when she was a child. She believed that her parents would blame her for Caylee's death, and that she would lose everything. So she made the unthinkable decision to keep the death a secret. The defense's story was that Caylee put Caylee's body in the trunk of her car, drove around with it for several days, and eventually placed the remains in the wooded area near her home. The duct tape, they claimed, was not a murder weapon but something innocuous. Perhaps tape that was already on the blanket or trash bag, or tape that became attached to the skull during decomposition. This theory was met with widespread skepticism from legal analysts, forensic experts, and the public. But Jose Baez was committed to it, and he would build his entire defense around this narrative. Chapter 5: The Trial. The trial of Caylee Anthony began on May 24, 2011, in Orlando, Florida. It had been nearly 3 years since Caylee Anthony's remains had been discovered, and the entire nation had been waiting for this moment. The courtroom at the Orange County Courthouse became ground zero for a media frenzy unlike anything seen since the trial of O.J. Simpson. More than 200 journalists from around the world were credentialed to cover the proceedings. The courtroom gallery was filled to capacity every single day. News networks including HLN, CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC provided gavel-to-gavel coverage, with legal analysts dissecting every piece of testimony, every objection, every facial expression. The public was absolutely obsessed. Water cooler conversations across America revolved around the latest developments in the Caylee Anthony trial. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorneys Linda Drain Burdick, Jeff Ashton, and Frank George, called more than 80 witnesses over the course of the 6-week trial. They methodically built their case, piece by piece. The forensic evidence was presented in painstaking detail. Dr. Arpit Vass, a senior research scientist at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, testified about the decompositional compounds found in the trunk of Caylee's car. He explained that the chemical signature was consistent with human decomposition and that it would take a body of approximately 30 to 40 pounds, the size of a small child, to produce the levels detected. Dr. Kenneth Furden, a professor of chemistry at Florida International University, testified about the chloroform. He explained that the levels of chloroform detected were far above what would be expected from normal environmental sources or chemical reactions with household products. A computer forensics expert testified that someone using the Anthony family computer had searched for a recipe for chloroform, along with searches for neck breaking and how to make someone unconscious. The searches were conducted in the weeks leading up to Caylee's disappearance. The prosecution argued that Casey was the one conducting these searches. The medical examiner, Dr. Jan Garavaglia, known to many viewers from her television show, Dr. G, medical examiner, testified about the autopsy. She confirmed that the cause of death could not be determined from the skeletonized remains but stated that the manner of death was homicide. The defense team fought back aggressively on every front. They challenged the forensic evidence with their own experts. They argued that the chemical compounds detected in the trunk could have come from a dead animal or from environmental contamination. They pointed out that the cadaver dog alerts could have been false positives. They argued that the computer searches could have been conducted by George Anthony. But the most dramatic moment of the trial came when Caylee Anthony herself took the witness stand. On July 5, 2011, Caylee walked to the stand wearing a dark cardigan, her hair pulled back from her face. She appeared nervous, vulnerable, and fragile. For hours, under the careful guidance of Jose Baez, she told her version of events. She admitted to everything. She admitted she had lied about the nanny. She admitted she had lied about her job. She admitted she had lied to her parents, to her friends, to the police. She admitted that Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez did not exist. She admitted she was not a good mother. She admitted that she had been living in a fantasy world, a world of denial and self-deception. But she denied killing her daughter. According to Caylee, she woke up on June 16, 2008, to the sounds of her parents arguing. She went downstairs and found her mother and father in a heated confrontation. Caylee claimed she then went back upstairs, and that when she looked out the window, she saw her father carrying Caylee's limp, wet body from the pool area into the house. Caylee testified that she was terrified of her father. She claimed that George had molested her as a child and that he was a controlling, abusive presence in her life. She said that after Caylee drowned, George took charge of the situation and convinced her to keep it a secret. When asked why she didn't call 911, why she didn't try to save her own daughter, Caylee broke down in tears on the stand. She said she didn't remember exactly what happened. She was in shock. She was traumatized. She had blocked it out. George Anthony took the stand and categorically denied every accusation made against him. He denied molesting Caylee. He denied ever finding Caylee in the pool. He denied having anything to do with covering up her death. He testified that he had no idea how Caylee died and that he, too, had been deceived by Caylee's lies. The contrast between Caylee's tearful testimony and George's indignant denials left the jury with a difficult choice. Someone was lying. The question was who? Chapter 6, The Verdict. On July 5, 2011, after 6 weeks of testimony and more than 10 hours of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The room was completely silent, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Caylee Anthony stood, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes fixed on the jury. The clerk began reading the verdict. On the charge of first-degree murder, we the jury find the defendant not guilty. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Cindy Anthony let out an audible sob. George Anthony's face went pale. On the charge of aggravated child abuse, we the jury find the defendant not guilty. Another charge. Another not guilty. On the charge of aggravated manslaughter of a child, we the jury find the defendant not guilty. 3 counts. 3 not guilty verdicts. Caylee Anthony was acquitted of all charges related to the death of her daughter. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of hundreds had gathered behind police barricades. Giant screens had been set up to broadcast the verdict. When the words, "not guilty," echoed across the crowd, the reaction was immediate and visceral. People screamed in outrage. Some burst into tears. Others shouted obscenities at the screen. The scene was chaotic, emotional, and raw. "How is this possible?" People shouted, "She killed her daughter! She's guilty!" But the jury saw it differently. In interviews after the trial, the jurors explained their reasoning. They said that while they believed Caylee Anthony was somehow responsible for Caylee's death, the prosecution had failed to meet the burden of proof required for a murder conviction. The cause of death was never determined. The forensic evidence, while compelling, had been successfully challenged by the defense. The timeline of events was uncertain. The duct tape could have shifted after death. The computer searches could not be definitively linked to Caylee. And the accidental drowning theory, while seemingly far-fetched to the public, introduced enough reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. Caylee Anthony was found guilty on 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement, the lies she had told during the initial investigation. These were misdemeanor offenses. She was sentenced to time served and was released from jail on July 17, 2011, having already spent nearly 3 years behind bars. She walked out of the Orange County Jail in the middle of the night, under heavy security, to avoid the crowds of angry protesters who had gathered outside. She was driven away in an unmarked vehicle, a free woman. Chapter 7: The Aftermath. In the years following the trial, Caylee Anthony disappeared from public view, though her name has never faded from the collective memory of the American public. She has reportedly struggled to find employment, faced harassment and death threats, and been forced to move repeatedly when her identity was discovered. In 2017, she was living in a gated community in South Florida but fled after neighbors confronted her. She has been the subject of endless documentaries, books, podcasts, and television specials. Cindy and George Anthony have largely retreated from public life. The trial destroyed their family in ways that can never be repaired. They lost their granddaughter. They lost their daughter in a different way. And they have spent years defending themselves against accusations made during the trial. Jose Baez wrote a book about the case and has continued his legal career, handling high-profile cases. Jeff Ashton, the prosecutor, also wrote a book and ran for state attorney in Florida. The Caylee Anthony case has left an indelible mark on American culture. It raised profound questions about the nature of maternal love, the reliability of forensic evidence, the influence of media on public opinion, and the limits of the justice system. It became a case that everyone had an opinion about, an opinion that was often visceral, emotional, and absolute. The duct tape found on Caylee's skull remains the single most haunting image of the entire tragedy. For millions of people, that image was enough. It was proof of murder. It was evidence of something unspeakable. But for the jury, it was not enough to convict. And that distinction, between what we believe and what can be proven, is the foundation of the American criminal justice system. Conclusion: Caylee Marie Anthony would have turned 21 years old in August of 2026. She would have graduated high school. She might have gone to college. She might have fallen in love, started a career, built a life of her own. Instead, she remains frozen in time, forever 3 years old, her face known to millions of strangers who never had the privilege of meeting her. The Caylee Anthony case forces us to confront deeply uncomfortable truths about the limits of our justice system. We want closure when a child dies. We want answers. We want someone to be held accountable. But the law does not operate on emotion. It operates on proof. And when the proof falls short, even the most compelling narrative cannot secure a conviction. The jury did their duty as they saw it. They followed the instructions they were given. They applied the law as it exists. And they reached a verdict that satisfied the legal standard, even if it satisfied no one else. To this day, the central question remains unanswered: what really happened to Caylee Anthony on that day in June of 2008? We may never know the full truth. Only one person knows what happened, and she has given us stories instead of answers, lies instead of clarity. Caylee Anthony's story is ultimately a tragedy of neglect, of deception, and of a life cut brutally short. She deserved better than the fate that found her. She deserved a mother who would protect her. She deserved a family that would keep her safe. She deserved to grow up and become whoever she was meant to be. In the end, That is the only thing about this case that remains beyond all dispute. Thank you for watching this documentary from The Bearded Verdict. If you found this video compelling, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. We cover true crime cases from around the world, exploring the evidence, the trials, and the human stories behind the headlines. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Until next time, stay curious.